So, welcome to the server. To anyone who's new, welcome back to anyone who's been here before. We are running an event this week on Japanese culture, Japanese tourism, what you can do in Japan, what people do in Japan, also more on the culture aspect, some interesting, unique points about Japanese culture, how you can go to Japan and blend in with Japanese culture or not create too many big waves. Okay, those kind of things. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4 guests here. Plus, Adios is going to be helping me with some things. I'm going to be moderating the event. My name is Ryan. I myself have lived in Japan for 2 years, but our guests here have longer/more experience in Japan. So let's start out by having them introduce themselves, maybe starting with the top with Darius.
Sure. Hi, guys. I'm Darius. I was also on the last stage event, but if you weren't there for that one, I've been studying Japanese for like 12-ish years. I do all sorts of things. I don't use it for my main job, but I use it for other stuff. Like I help run some anime conventions on the East Coast in America. And I fairly regularly go to Japan for either like business or anime convention related stuff or just for fun. I don't live there, but I have a lot of perspective on stuff. So looking forward to talking about that.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Next, go to Morg.
Yeah, hi. I'm Morg. First time for me joining these kind of events, so I'm pretty excited. I've been living in Japan for about 2 years, more or less. I work here in Japan as a software engineer for one of the big companies. So my perspective is probably going to be a bit more skewed on the side of foreigner working in like a high-tech, foreigner-friendly environment. So not as much as in the like everyday Japanese countryside kind of thing. So it's going to be a bit different maybe. But yeah, I'm far from fluent in Japanese, far from it. So that's going to be another perspective to have, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely helpful to have someone who's not fluent in Japanese. Our other 3 speakers are pretty good, right? But it's also helpful to hear what is Japan like for intermediates or beginners of Japanese, okay? And all of us will be able to speak a little bit on what we can imagine it's like to not know Japanese. But anyway, thank you. Yes, Morg lives in Japan. Next we'll go with Spogerific or just Spog. Can we hear about yourself?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm Spog. I have been living in Japan for about 4.5 years at this point. I first came to Japan as a student in late 2016. I was a student for 2 years, graduated, started working in Japan for a couple of years, got married, and now my wife is 38 weeks pregnant, and we're just waiting for the baby. So,
Yeah, congrats.
thank you.
It's becoming any time now, right?
Yep, pretty much any time.
Anytime.
I've been studying Japanese for about 12 years. So not 12 years, about 11 years actually. So I spoke Japanese pretty fluently before I came to the country, and then I guess I got better after I moved here. And yeah, I've worked a couple different jobs. I've even done a little bit of volunteering. Like more the jobs that I worked were like software engineering type stuff. But I've been to a university in Japan, although it's a little bit of not a standard university. So I kind of know what it's like to go to school in Japan, so I've got a little bit of a unique perspective to offer as well, I suppose. Although I suppose Sky has also been to university in Japan. And yeah, that's it.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so Sky, what about yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Sky. I'm a college dropout, I guess, that came over in 2019 and started learning after I arrived. And I guess I studied language for a little while, and then I took N2 and eventually M1. And I wouldn't say I'm fluent, but I'm competent enough for job stuff and schoolwork. I work in the animation industry and study animation right now. And that's about it, I suppose. I study at a Senmongakko as opposed to a university, so more like a trade school. But yeah, that's about it, I suppose.
Oh yeah, great. So we got a wide range of people here, right? now we can start kind of asking some questions about Japan and culture, right? Remember, this is a two-faceted talk, so it'll be partly about traveling in Japan and going to Japan, be that be language barriers or maybe places to go, maybe you don't know anything about Japan. Also, Japan has a very unique culture. They're on their little island over there, and for the most part, kind of like this little Japan land almost, I could say, where people don't often go to Japan unless they have a reason to go to Japan, and vice versa. No one really leaves Japan unless they have a reason to. So they have a lot of interesting culture elements that sometimes if you don't know about them, you'll kind of run into problems where you're going against it. So those would be kind of what we're talking about. Okay, there's already like 8-ish questions that are loaded into our stage questions channel, so you can go ask your own questions there. And we are at 99 listening, 100. Oh, just popped up for 100. There we go. I got 100 listeners now. Finally, got 100 listeners. And we haven't even asked the first question. Great. So, first question. First question's a joke question. I'll skip that one for now. Okay. There's a lot of people who hear about English teaching in Japan. There's in particular one program called the JET program. Okay. So one person wants to know, what is the best way to get to Japan, to be living in Japan? Is there a best way? Is that the JET program? Or are there other ways to kind of get into Japan? And maybe one other way to ask the question would be, how did you guys get to Japan?
Yeah, if I may start on this. So I think today actually we don't have any English teachers here, right? So that's going to be a bit of a different. I don't know if anybody here has done English teaching in Japan before.
I've done JET, so.
Oh, okay, so maybe you probably know better than I do. I think so. One thing that I would like to say first of all is that we see a lot of time people that basically they want to move to Japan, and that's their main goal. And like I think like career wise, you should be focusing on what you want to do rather than where you want to live. And that's like the main point that I think it's important to point out, because a lot of people would gladly take some jobs that they might not even like just because they want to live in Japan. And I think that can easily backfire. And especially English teaching, I guess, it might not be for everybody. And just because you want to live in Japan, I don't like you might end up moving here and resenting your life, or not your life, but like your job and everything. And it might not be a pleasant experience. Just putting that out.
Yeah, I know one person who went to Japan for a JET program in the summer and left in the winter because they realized, oh man, I don't like teaching. Right? When someone says, I want to join the JET program, can you tell me about it? The first question I ask them, why do you want to join the JET program? And if they don't say in their answer, I like teaching, I say you shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
Because a lot of them view the JET program as a way into Japan. So the question was, how can we get into Japan? Is JET program the easiest way? Personally, I think JET program should not be viewed as a way to get into Japan. It should be a way to get into a teaching job, and it happens to be in Japan, which for some people would be pretty cool.
Another thing, if I might chime in, I've never done JET, but I know a couple people that have done JET, and this is something that should be emphasized, is the JET program is like an official, if I remember correctly anyway, it's an official Japanese government thing to help send native English speakers to like schools throughout Japan, like high schools and middle schools and stuff, right? So the thing is that they're going to send people to schools throughout the entire country. So you're going to get sent to like the middle of nowhere, almost most likely, because there are more schools in the middle of nowhere than there are schools in Tokyo. So a lot of people's images of Japan are like, oh, like life in Tokyo and stuff like that. And then they get sent to the Japanese equivalent of Nebraska, and then they're like, oh no.
Yeah. So definitely also don't expect a JET program to be your way into living into nice big Tokyo. Might be out in the country. We have one extra guest joining us for the panel who might be able to add some opinion for this. Would you like to introduce yourself, Nuke Marine?
Yeah, just lived in Japan for 14 years. 7 of those was military, so I won't count too much of that experience for getting to Japan. But then 7 years living here as retired. Worked 6 years part-time-ish at an English school, but now last year I've been a part owner of my own English school, and also experience with buying an apartment here.
So what do you think? How can people get to Japan? If their goal is to get to Japan, what do you think? How can they do that? And is English teaching a good way to do that?
Well, obviously the easiest way to get to Japan is just travel on just a tourist visa. Don't make the mistake of committing a crime of teaching English while here on a tourist visa, because that'll get you kicked out quick if they catch it, and it's not too hard to catch. Legally, you need to have someone who can sponsor you. The other legal way, but probably not the one I suggest, is marry someone from Japan. That'll allow you to stay here quick, a lot easier.
Whoops. Whoops.
But no, you're not going to do much unless you get a company sponsored. Chet's the most famous one, but any English school likes to hire foreign speakers to come to Japan, and they'll sponsor them for the year or two, give them a place to stay, handle the insurance, handle the pay. Those are usually, though, the horror stories come from the companies that are, let's say, less than shady, like just completely dark. And also personally, as a guy who has had people apply for jobs for me, I hate it when people want to come say they want to apply for English speaking jobs. The only reason they're doing that is so they can come to Japan. I'd rather you want to teach English. Being in Japan is a secondary, but that's a rare one there.
I definitely agree. Like I said earlier, if someone tells me I want to do the JET program and they don't say because I want to teach, I say you shouldn't do it.
If I may, I haven't done JET or anything, but I've known quite a few ALTs and the like over my time here, and most of them don't seem to integrate very heavily into Japanese communities. A lot of them seem to like to keep to themselves. And I get the impression that there's a very, I guess, insular nature to JET and these other sort of English teaching if you don't make a real attempt to branch out. And I feel like half of that is the schedules you get put under at these schools can be quite tough. And like it is a lot of the time, like it's a full-time job, right? Like you're going there to teach. If you're going to you want to experience Japan in that sort of way, like the stereotypical sort of pseudo-touristy lifestyle while you're living there. I'm not sure if JET is really your foot in the door to that, because you are going to have a full-time job that's going to be relatively intensive while you do that. So personally, I had a bit of a complicated roundabout journey because I had sort of an offer from an animation studio, but couldn't really do the Japanese stuff. So they basically gave me a year free ride through language school to get my Japanese up to scratch so that I could come work for them after they saw my demo reel from the complicated story. But I would actually, if you have the financial ability, I would strongly recommend possibly investigating 6 months, 3 months at a language school, because if you have high enough attendance, have high enough grades, often the, I guess, letter of recommendation or whatever that you can get out of a language school can be a big help in getting you there, and the resources that these places have can be big helps in finding you work to tide you over in the early stages of transitioning from a student visa to a work visa. I haven't made that transition yet because I decided to go on and carry on studying, so I'm still on my student visa. But if you're unsure or looking for job opportunities and you haven't really found a way to get your foot in the door, it's often much easier to get your foot in the door once you're actually here and can network and do stuff like that. And I think if you have the finances available, language school's always not necessarily a good option to help you actually learn the language, but certainly a good way to give yourself time to experience the country, see if it's for you, and then, if need be, move on and sort of job search from a foothold, I guess.
Another way is go through the college system, because there's I think Temple University is the one I know, but they'll sponsor you on a student visa as well. I'm not just learning the language, but just going to college in Japan as well. So also, if you're prior military, the GI Bill, I've known guys that stayed here in Japan on the GI Bill going to Temple University.
Yeah, I think this is something that I'm not sure people are going to ask specifically about, but it's something that we should probably talk about is basically you need a visa in order to get into Japan. And I think it was maybe Ryan or Morg or maybe Nukarine that mentioned it earlier, but you need to have a visa, which is like permission to stay in Japan, and there are a couple different ways to do it. Like we mentioned, you can work, you can get married, you can go to school, but there are also a couple other ones. One thing that I think would be a nice mention is the work holiday visa, which basically lets you stay in Japan and travel and work around for a year at maximum. And there were very little requirements for it. Just a couple nationalities. I know that Americans can't use it.
Yeah, Americans can't.
I know that Americans can't use it, but a lot of other countries can. And I know a couple people that have come to the country on a work holiday visa, and they ended up liking it and moved to a regular working visa and have stayed here since.
I guess if you actually want to enter the country, there's also a lot of countries that have like visa-less stays that are possible up to 90 days or so that can let you sort of go and figure some stuff out if you need some time in that regard.
Yeah, I think that's a bit of a gray area, though. Yeah,
Yeah,
so like the thing is,
you can't work during that period for sure.
Yeah.
But if you're like concerned about accommodation and you need to, you can go, and if you decide during your 30 to 90 day period that you like the country enough to stick around for longer, then I'm pretty sure you can actually apply for a visa while you're in country. But I'm not actually sure.
I think that's not technically allowed. I think there's like a gray area from what I heard, where basically to get like your certificate of eligibility, you need to apply from an embassy that is outside of Japan. So if you are within Japan, like as a tourist, because that's basically like a visa tourist, whatever. Like basically I've heard of people going like they go to Korea for like a few weeks to wait for their certificate to get to the Korean embassy, and then they come back into Japan, and it's a bit of a gray area where I've heard that immigration might not like it. I don't know if it's specifically not allowed, but it might be tricky. Yeah.
Okay. I have some personal experience with that, actually, if you don't mind. This is going to be more like boring paperwork type stuff. People might be super interested in it, but it's something you need to know if you are going to end up moving to Japan. So there are basically two types of paperwork that you need in order to get proper permission to move into Japan. The first one is called a Certificate of Eligibility, a COE. And what that basically is that's a hard one to get. If like say you're going to work in Japan, you need to have a company that's going to hire you, and then you also need to have the like you need to have a college degree or whatever that fits with the kind of job that you're going to do. So like if you're working as a software engineer or something, you need to have a college degree, and it needs to relate in some
That's
way.
not true. Sorry. I just want to point out you just need to have a college degree. It doesn't have to be within the role you're applying for.
No, I mean it depends on which type of working visa you get. That's what the whatever. Okay. Anyway,
as someone who actually has like for a fine arts degree, I know for a fact that it's not actually just a bachelor's degree. You can have a college level qualification. So the Senmon-gakko I'm attending doesn't hand out bachelor's degrees, but the diploma would qualify me in the same way if I have a company sponsorship and all that. But it has to be pertaining specifically to the arts, my qualification, if I want to apply for that degree. So it is, I think Spock's correct here in that it depends on the degree.
We should also remind everyone that we are not lawyers, and these are just random opinions.
Yeah.
In the chat, I posted a link to the MOFA, which is the actual place to go to apply for visas, which is the easiest place to read up and apply for visas.
Yeah.
You don't apply through it; you get the information from it.
Yeah. Oh, we've been talking about moving to Japan for 25 minutes, so we should move on a little bit. We can move on to a slightly related topic. What kind of work is available in Japan? There's people who are interested in specifically jobs outside of teaching and software engineers. What other kinds of work is there available for foreigners? Anyone have any ideas?
Any corporation in Tokyo will probably hire you if you got a skill and also knowledge of the language. That makes you very attractive as far as hiring goes.
Yeah. So knowledge of the language is pretty well. Let me make this a new question. Do you think being proficient at Japanese is required to get a job outside of like English teaching or software engineering or something?
I think one thing that is always good to keep in mind is that, especially for a lot of jobs, that are like local jobs, you have to always think, what can I offer to the company that a local Japanese native person cannot offer? And depending on the job, like on the position you're gonna have, so in some kind of jobs you don't need to have like to know Japanese that well at all. Like for example, for my job, I don't use Japanese. I don't need to know Japanese. But for other jobs, definitely. I mean, of course, if it's like a traditional Japanese company, for example, probably gonna have to have a very high level of Japanese for that. But like as long as you keep in mind the comparison with what can a local Japanese person offer that I can't, or vice versa, and that's like the main thing.
Yeah, one person asks specifically, I said earlier, other than teaching or software engineering, one person actually just asked, how specifically can they get a job as a software engineer? How do you get into that?
For me, I was a kind of like a like odd case, or at least from my point of view, it's probably the easiest way to get into Japan as a software engineer. Basically, work for a large company, like a large multinational corporation outside of Japan, and then request for like an international transfer within Japan. And that's basically what I did. I worked in Ireland for 3-4 years, and then I decided to just change country. And I was like, hey, there's a spot open in Japan. I want to move there. And they said, okay, and I relocated here. So I think that's the easiest way. And also you get to become familiar with the corporate culture within that specific company, and then like you don't get like any bad surprises after you move to Japan. Otherwise, there's all kinds of job postings for software companies within Japan, and you can try applying there, I guess. But I don't have experience with that.
I think I would call that the smoothest way more, not necessarily the easiest way.
Well, yeah. Fair.
It's like it's very like smooth to the transfer, but it does involve you like working at another company somewhere else for years, right? So
yeah, fair.
Yeah.
Not even. You can actually, if you look at the applications, again, Facebook, Microsoft, or some Google, you can get or Netflix, Hulu. There's just so many companies international that work in Japan because it's 130 million people they want to sell stuff to. So you can get hired, and again, because you want to go to Japan, that makes things easier. Because as far as corporation goes, if you want to go the military route, there's that. I do not recommend that. But then if you live in the U.S., there's also the USA Jobs, which again, you got about 1,100 or so positions always being applied for through the military bases in Japan. You work as a civilian as well. And again, the other benefit instead of going to a Japanese company is that usually the pay is better. The pay is so much better than what you would get at a Japanese company.
You don't need to work at a huge Japanese company in order to work as a programmer in Japan. What I actually personally did was after I graduated, I spoke Japanese already, and I just applied to small Japanese companies because I did not have any official experience or even like a college degree in programming or computer science or anything like that. Everything I knew was self-taught, so I just applied to companies with a small portfolio, and eventually I got hired by a small company, and that was that. I had to pass a test, a Japanese a test accepted by the Japanese government in order to qualify for the engineer visa that I got. But it is entirely possible if you at least speak a decent level of Japanese, but you don't have a super good resume on the programming side, to apply to smaller companies and get hired at smaller companies like that.
The only downside is smaller companies may not even know how to sponsor you yet. But if you work with them, you can probably teach them both directions and get that to work as well. But yeah, that is a good idea.
Yeah. Can I just get clarification? Earlier we talked about like the smoother way. You guys mean the smoother way of getting to Japan? Is that working for a company outside of Japan that has a sister company or branch inside Japan? Was that the smooth way?
Yeah, that's what I coined as smooth.
Yeah, I mean, specifically for software engineer at least. Yeah.
I just to chip in with that, I feel like in terms of like smoothness and stuff, just having something to get you in from outside, whether that be a job or like connections in an industry or whatever, like any way you can just sort of ease your way in rather than just go and sort of hope is always great. Like I got sent over by like my animation teacher sending my portfolio over to his friends in Japan and then them calling me up rather than me deciding initially to head over.
Yeah.
So
I
yeah.
completely agree with that. I would like to heavily echo that. And in particular, like if you really think about the possibilities, either you do already have some foot in the door, whether it be connections or your company or whatever, or you don't. And if you don't, then you're like everyone else in the world, right? Basically, everyone else who wants to go to Japan, you're exactly like them. And you can only send your resume into like random places and like hope they like you, right? And that honestly can be hard because there's a lot of competition. So if it's possible and you have like the time and ability to do it, I do actually recommend like building some sort of connection slowly over time to see if you can get your foot in the door somehow. And it can be something really simple, like you just make some friends. They happen to work at a company which is looking for like bilingual talent. And then they're like, oh, let's take your resume, right? Like it can be anything small like that. But it tends to be easier to go that route. And that certainly does not apply only to Japan. It applies to getting a job anywhere. But yeah, I would highly echo that sentiment.
That is a good point that Darius made. When I said that I applied to small companies in Japan, I already lived in the country and I already spoke Japanese, so those are two good big things working in my favor. I didn't really use any connections, but like Darius said, if you're just applying from overseas, then you're going to be in like just another fish in the sea, basically, and you're going to have difficulty getting noticed unless you have some kind of unique skill. So making connection is definitely a good idea. Were you going to say something, Sky?
Just before the point I was going to make, I'd like to echo that back to sort of language school or educational institutes or like other options to visit Japan beforehand, because if you can use that time to build connections or meet people there and make connections, then that can help you ease in at a later date for sure. All institutes usually, like language schools too, universities will have like career advisor like functionalities usually, and usually their references like attendance references especially seem to matter a lot to companies. I know a lot of people who like got rejected with really high grades from companies because they had middling to lower attendance in the language school I attended when they applied, whereas people with less significantly good grades would find jobs because they were attending all classes, and that sort of idea seems to be fairly consistent. But I guess what I wanted to say was returning to the original point of way back, rewinding to alternative jobs. I think like there are a lot of creative jobs as well available in Japan for sure. I think most of them will tend to request that you have some degree of Japanese proficiency. Like animation studios aren't particularly looking for people who can't speak a lick of Japanese, but they might or rather, they're not looking for in-house workers that can't speak any Japanese for sure, but they might outsource, for example. Game studios tend to be much more freeform with who they employ. I know that Platinum Games, I think, had an on-site translator when I visited for my interview. And I guess the only jobs I've seen people who like not really approach as foreigners is Japanese teaching, like teaching Japanese to Japanese people, and Japanese cooking, because I don't think it's actually possible to get a visa to cook Japanese food as a foreigner.
Did you say Japanese to Japanese people?
Yeah, like I personally have not met anyone who does that professionally here yet, but I'm sure people do, but it seems very rare, if nothing else.
I do know someone, and I don't know enough about his situation to really talk about it in detail, but I do know someone who has come to Japan on a I think it was some kind of cultural exchange visa, and he's only allowed to volunteer, not actually work.
Yeah.
But he was like 20 years old. He was pretty young, and he came to Japan on a cultural exchange visa to work at a like a Michelin-starred restaurant for a couple months or a year or so, just to get experience and put that on his resume. And then he plans to later open up his own restaurant in Japan.
I think that's likely the designated activities visa, if it was volunteering, I imagine. But
yeah, I think that's what it was.
Yeah, to my understanding, the way culinary visas work is that you can come as a professional with foreign styles of cooking, but you're not actually able to receive a visa to cook like Japanese food professionally. That's the extent of my understanding. Like he could open up any style or whatever, except Japanese. I'm not entirely sure about the details of this, but I know a lot of my classmates, Taiwanese classmates at language school, were complaining about the fact that they came here and they wanted to cook Japanese food, and then they wouldn't be able to, so they ended up going home and opening or working in Japanese style restaurants back in Taiwan as a result.
Yeah, that makes sense. That messes with my understanding too.
Yeah.
Okay, then maybe one last question about jobs. We might get some more, but real quick, does anyone happen to know anything about getting into the music industry? Does anyone have any interest or experience with that?
Interesting. So I don't know much about the details, but I know that as far as visa goes for like music professionally, I know there is a specific visa, or I don't know if it's a specific visa, but like a way to get in if you're like a famous musician, like somebody who's like world renowned. Like I mean, you don't have to be like top one musician in the world, but you need to have like a pretty big following. And I think there's an exception in that case where you might be able to work in Japan as a musician. And I know a couple of musicians that, I mean, I don't know them personally, but I know about them that have done this. I think, for example, the singer for Millie, the band, she's a Chinese Canadian, and now she works in Japan and sings in Japanese band called Millie. And I think that's how she got into the country, for example. But that's like a very high standard thing, so it's not like your traditional musician kind of path, I guess. That's as much as I know about that.
Yeah,
Okay.
I have a couple acquaintances who have gone that path. I unfortunately don't know the details about like legally how they got their foot in the country and stuff like that. But something that seems common among them is that they went on like those like contest like singing shows. They're all singers that I know, so they like did those like singing shows and did really well on them, and as a result got like offers and sort of went from there. So that seems like it's a viable path. I know 3 people who have done that.
Cool. And next, let's get off the topic of jobs, because jobs are boring. But I mean, they're important. If you want to live in Japan, you need a job.
I like my job.
Yeah. If you want to live in Japan, you need a job. So it's definitely an important topic. Let's talk about living in Japan. Okay. First, here's going to be kind of a big fun question. Is Japan a place worth living?
No.
Yes.
No.
No.
He absolutely
Yes, no.
Don't do it.
It's going to be a very, very like split opinion, probably. Mine is yes. I think it is.
I would like to jump in and just say that, like, I love Japan, but I feel like 99% of people who want to come to Japan or are interested in coming to Japan come for the wrong reasons and then end up going home. And like, I am glad to a degree because I got my very expensive Wacom drawing tablet for an extremely large 90% discount because one of my LGBT colleagues decided that Japan was not LGBT friendly enough for them and then left and sold me at a very low markup. So I feel like that there are many aspects to Japanese culture that one should be very cognizant of when they commit. Certainly as a member of the LGBT community, I certainly feel that the country as a whole is lagging very far behind our Western neighbors, shall we say, in some regards. In other regards, it's very good. Like, for example, accessibility to trans healthcare is really, really good and easy compared to a lot of places which are very bad. But just the general vibe and openness of people is a lot lower, and that can shake people quite significantly.
Well, Japan is a society. If you like to stand out in appearance, which probably doesn't mean you're LGBT, but what if you stand out? That's the part that they may not like as much, because I know there's plenty of there's I think a general support of not LGBT. I thought there was general support as far as like people who want to be who are that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't say Japan's a society that's unsupportive. It's just it's very, I guess, restrained in its support. So I know a lot of people that feel like they come with I guess, foreign portrayals or the expectations from Japanese media, etc. They come over with a certain expectation and then it's not met, and then they feel very disillusioned. And I don't think that's necessarily restricted to LGBT topics or anything. I think that's restricted to a lot of things. People, I think we've already sort of covered this idea of like people coming in with their expectations from media or discussions and like building this image of what Japan is in their head, and then they arrive and it's a place, it's a country, and it's got its own culture, and it's not necessarily everything you've bigged it up to be in your head.
Yeah, I think there's actually you raised a really interesting point about media representation, like of Japan outside of Japan. Like I think, like overall, the general understanding of people outside of Japan of how Japan is seems to be extremely split between it's either this amazing dream country of anime and weird stuff and amazing food and traveling and everything is great, and also this kind of like place where like work culture is terrible and people are being overworked to death and there's like high suicide rate and all that kind of stuff. And it's a really weird point of view from either side, which I don't think it fairly depict how the country actually is. And depending on what your approach is and like where you are in Japan and what kind of culture you come from and how used you are to a culture shock and living outside of your own country, like all these kinds of variables really affect how you end up viewing the country. And especially work-wise, I mean, I'm a bit biased because I don't work in a Japanese company, but work-wise, I've heard and I've seen myself as well that there's been a lot of changes for work culture since 2018 onward, for like new regulations and stuff. So a lot of stuff is still true about overwork within some companies, but it's not as up to date as like all these articles you often read in the English internet about Japan work culture, for example. They're not as up to date as they seem to be, at least. So your experiences will definitely change a lot depending on what job you have, where you go, and all kind of stuff.
And also, if you're miserable in your own country, you're probably going to be miserable in Japan. You know, just it's because you bring your own baggage.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So basically the what Mort was saying, the cultural representations of Japan are, for the most part, I'd say they're true for a reason, and you can find things like that in Japan, like the terrible work rate and stuff like work environment and stuff like that. But it doesn't have to be like that. There are a lot of places that are good places to work, and there are bad places to work too. And I'd also definitely echo what Sky said in that you should definitely come to Japan and experience it before you completely pull the trigger and decide to live here forever.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anyone who wants to talk about what are some challenges people face when first moving to Japan?
Probably finding a place to live would be a challenge if
Yeah.
you're not.
So I think that's sorry if I'm talking too much, but I think the like depending on how used you are to living outside of your own country, some people might conflate like living outside of your own country as like challenging, and also living in Japan as challenging. Definitely finding a place is always going to be a problem if you move outside of, like, if you move to a different country, because you don't have, like, you don't know the, like, which website to browse. Language might be a barrier, and I mean definitely a barrier in Japan. And like what's a reasonable price, or which neighborhoods are good, and all that kind of stuff. So that's going to be a problem, and especially in Japan. I didn't have an issue myself, but you often hear about, for example, landlords not renting for, like, to foreigners because of reasons which I think might be valid reasons sometimes, but it's definitely discrimination, which is not a good thing, and that happens. So that will be something that you have to look out for. And also, it's extremely expensive to move within Japan, like to move into Japan, and also within Japan. There's like a lot of kind of fees for first getting a contract, like key money. There's a fees to your rental agency, to like your real estate agent, and it's super expensive.
Yeah, I think my first month was $3,000.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. What about specifically kind of meshing in with the culture? So certainly moving into Japan in terms of like renting and finding a place is hard. Do you guys think people often have problems kind of adjusting to the culture in Japan when they first move there?
Something that I would definitely say applies this is kind of related to finding a place to live, but and it's not really the kind of thing you'd expect to be culture, but trash. Trash in Japan is very different from how I experienced it in the US. There are no public trash cans. You're expected to carry your trash with you and either secretly drop it off at a convenience store when nobody's looking or take it home. Or when you're at home, the trash that you take out at home, depending on where you live, you can only first of all, everybody has to separate the trash into like recyclables, plastic, and burnable garbage. And then you can only throw out trash in certain times of days depending on where you live. And for example, if you made some kind of food with meat or whatever, and you've got the packaging of the meat with the nice juices in there, you might not be able to throw that out until a day or two later, and that is that can be quite annoying, actually.
All right, so let me one thing. Here's some expertise I didn't say. Okay, for 4 months I worked at basically a housing agency on base. So I had to basically get apartments for people, help people get apartments out in town to live. As far as the garbage concerns, what he says is correct. There are separate days. So there's burnables. Basically, the rotting stuff is usually twice a week. Plastics once a week. Recyclables, aluminum cans, PET bottles once a week, and then on every other Friday is a special day, like the non-burnables or the big shit. As far as the one hint I'd say, the rotting stuff, like the burnable stuff that you like, the meat that's been tainted with meat juices or whatnot, put it in a little plastic bag and put it in your freezer, let it freeze, and then throw it away on the day of. That way you don't have to smell rotted food stuff all the time.
One more thing, sorry to keep talking, but depending on where you live, smaller apartments might not have a specific place for garbage, because if you just put food waste out in the street, then like crows and stuff are going to tear it up and then get it everywhere, and people are going to be mad at you for that. But larger apartments will have specific dedicated places for garbage. So like, even though they only come to take the garbage once every day, they've got like a metal bin that you can open up and put your garbage in, regardless of the day of the week that they take the garbage. But not every apartment has that. So that's something that you actually might want to look for when you're looking for apartments, is how your garbage is managed.
Yeah, I was about to point out also, it's very different. It can be very different which kind of like ward or city in Tokyo you live in, like for the garbage rules. For example, in my ward, for example, like I think we basically put everything into burnable, almost everything, aside from cans and plastic. No, but like basically it can be very different. Like I spent a few weeks when I first moved here in Minatoku, and there they basically it was much different. You have to properly separate everything. Then I moved here and I got my own like leaflet with all the explanation for the garbage, and it was basically said, yeah, just throw everything into burnable. So that was much different. So also like knowing the garbage rules might be a good thing for like to decide where you want to live within Tokyo, at least.
All right, I'll give two warnings on both directions. One is, if you're one of those guys who don't like to follow the rules, think you'll throw away trash whenever you want to. They have cameras everywhere, and they got old people who got nothing more than time in their hand than to look over the recordings and find out who the hell did that, especially if you live in those large apartment buildings. On the other hand, if you're one of those that do follow the rules, but you don't look Japanese, and someone else didn't follow the rules, they're going to blame you. So you might find a bag of garbage outside your door, because they got to do it passive aggressive. They're never going to come in and confront you about it, where you can tell them, hey, that's not my garbage. But anyway, that's from two different directions. But generally, though, if you follow the rules, like everything else in Japan, you'll be okay.
Mm-hmm. Not to take us off the trash talk, but getting back to the question of cultural stuff, I want to say that I think it really depends a lot on the person, how much you can culturally like integrate and feel comfortable from that perspective. A lot of it is certainly social. It has a little bit to do with your personality, and you should be aware of your own personality, right? So if you're like a very introverted person, realize that you're going to have that plus like a language barrier, and you're probably going to need to actively do something to feel like you're like actually being able to integrate into the culture. And certainly knowing Japanese helps. because otherwise you're stuck more in the like foreigner community. So that's somewhere where I would say that knowing at least a conversational level of Japanese really helps a lot with enjoying the cultural aspect of living in Japan.
Well, also the last year in Japan, that kind of almost everybody had to be introverted for quite a while.
Yeah. If I may, like my experiences with socializing and whatever, like were obviously catalyzed by attending a school full of Japanese people. But before that, like I'd say that the biggest thing that you can do is just go and do shit. Like there are so many things, like going to a gym or a rock climbing gym or whatever. If it's just finding activities to do in public will like help you build up that first bit of community that you need to sort of really start socializing. I know a lot of people get like stuck on that first stage, I suppose, because they're trying to work out where can I meet Japanese people. Some people say go to the izakaya, some people go to the gym, some people like go to like koryukai or whatever, but like it really doesn't matter as long as you're doing something that you can enjoy. Like even if your Japanese like absolutely sucks, because mine did at the start, like as long as you have some kind of common ground and like you can like give broken communication about your enthusiasm for it, you'll be able to like maybe make a couple of friends, and really that's all you need to do to get the ball rolling. I feel like it's really easy to like accidentally wrap yourself up in the foreigner community because you sort of expect people to flock to you, I suppose. I guess I know a lot of people wonder why and I a lot is probably too much, but like some people certainly seem to wonder why the Japanese people aren't interested in them. They're a foreigner, they're cool, aren't they? And it's like, not really. We're long past the age where foreigners are a weird sight in Japan. Like you've got to sort of you have to put yourself out there and like get over any introversion you might have to really like if you've got work with Japanese people, and like I don't recommend making friends with coworkers necessarily, but like my coworkers are great. My classmates are great. They've been extremely welcoming as long as I've like made an effort to sort of engage with them. And I just like recommend that everyone just like really push themselves to make those first few steps, because I feel like the hardest step certainly is getting over that perceived idea of ostracization, because you will be an outsider for a while, but like you can get over that hurdle fairly easily if people are being receptive in the community you're in.
And to be honest, on that point as well, I just want to put a quick thing that I had the exact same experience, not just in Japan, but I lived for 3 years in Amsterdam, and as I said earlier, 4 years in Dublin. And in both situations, like it didn't feel any different from living in Japan as far as meeting locals or like making friends with locals. And like you will be an outsider, and that's like a truth of it. That's the reality of it. And like it's not gonna be because Japan is trying to push you out. It's just because that's how it is, and you have to make like adjustments yourself. You have to know how to put yourself out there and meet new people, regardless of it being Japan or not. Like I had the exact same experience elsewhere.
Like a lot of people develop this almost persecution complex because they don't bother to learn Japanese. Like most of the people who feel like outsiders genuinely are outsiders because they don't make the effort to integrate, I suppose. And I feel like Japan, just like any country, if you make that effort, it will eventually happen. Your mileage will vary for sure, but like so long as you're making an effort, you'll eventually get there, I think.
I'll add a couple other things. This most of this advice comes over if you live in larger cities, Tokyo, Yokohama, Osaka, wherever. Less so if you live in the east, Inakas, outside of the big metropolitan areas. But if you got an interest, there's probably some type of business that caters to that interest, or it's a club activity full of Japanese people that are also interested. Bike clubs, cooking, sports, mountain climbing, as you mentioned, running clubs, swimming clubs. There's all sorts of activity clubs. So get involved in those. You're going to be able to mix with people who have a shared interest, and that'll overcome any language barriers for that part. As far as integration, it's also I'm an outgoing person, but I have no problem like sitting in my room on the computer all day. You probably see my internet presence, you know that to be true. But it is easy. That's an easy trap to get to as well, because you've got really good broadband connection, just amazing here in Japan. And it's very easy to get just watch American shows or whatever your native language is instead of turning to Japanese. So I get that as well. So careful about that trap.
Yeah. Okay. Do you guys think discrimination against foreigners is a big issue in Japan?
No.
More so for black people than white people, and definitely more so for Asian people.
Yeah, so I would say it's definitely a thing that exists. In what ways it actually and might end up affecting you personally depends, like on what Nuke was just saying about your exact background, as well as what you're trying to do, right? So, like, if you're trying to get certain types of jobs, then that might, like, for example, a sales job, like your race might end up being like more relevant, and it's sort of a mixed bag. With
Yeah.
regards to like non-work things, I would say that there isn't necessarily discrimination, but there is a sense of like Morg was sort of saying, like treating you like an outsider because you are. But that is not some like a wall that cannot be broken at all. Like it's very easy to break through that wall. It's just the like initial sort of like, who's this person? Like, can I really trust them? And can I be their friend? And like, if you like just start talking with people and they get to know you, you can break through that barrier. And so I wouldn't call that one discrimination. And I think that should be separated clearly.
Yeah, and to double down on that, on what you said, which I totally agree. Well, first of all, there's going to be a lot of different reactions based on like whether you're like white person or black person or whatever other ethnicity. So it's not really easy to, for me as a white guy at least, say there is or there is not discrimination. But just to go back to the idea of they will treat you differently, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, which is true. Like that also has to do, I think, from the point of view of the Japanese person, is going to be, oh god, there's like a guy that is not Japanese, I don't speak English, I have no idea, like what are they going to do? Like it's more like they might be scared of how you approach them over, like, rather than like them discriminating you like flat out, right?
Yeah.
And
it's more like
I-
profiling almost.
yeah, like there's definitely going to be some discrimination, and it changes based on, as you said, on your whatever situation you have. But a lot of it is going to be like they are more afraid of you than you are of them, kind of thing, I think.
Yeah, because I think a lot of Japanese people have probably had experiences where like some crazy foreigner like did something around them and they're like, oh God, like I don't want to associate
Yeah.
with those people, right? Like that's definitely a thing that happens in Japan. And so people definitely tend to sometimes have colored impressions about foreigners, but it
Fucking
definitely
K
depends on the
bloggers.
person.
And again, this is going to change whether you go to big cities where there's many
Yeah.
foreigners, smaller cities where you may be the only person they've met in a long time. And again, and I hate to say this since we're all guys, I'm assuming we're all guys speaking here. Like, again, experiences versus not only racism, but also sexism is going to be different if you go to Japan as a guy versus a gal.
Yeah, actually, on that note, A, we're not all guys here. B, actually, the next question was about women. Is someone asks, how safe is it for foreign women living in Japan? Media says it's fairly difficult for girls. Is it something to be mindful of when visiting?
I don't feel any of us are really that qualified to answer that question, I guess, but like of my foreign friends that are women, I would say that most of them would hold the idea that it's something to definitely be mindful of, but not necessarily like it's not very likely as long as you avoid, I don't know, like Dotonbori in Osaka or just those kinds of areas. If you just take care and, you know, observe protocol, then you'll probably be fine, realistically. I don't think I think Japan on the whole is a pretty safe country, and you're definitely not unlikely to experience something like an incident on the train, but you're not also far less likely to get involved in violence on the street, I reckon. So I guess that's the way to view it.
I kind of wanna share this anecdote from that a friend of mine, like a female friend of mine, shared with me, which I thought was pretty interesting. Again, this is like a one single experience, so it might not be like might not apply to all of them, but it's an interesting point of view that she had a really bad time in Japan when she was visiting once, because I mean I'm not gonna excuse this because it's terrible, but one thing she said is that the way you dress in Japan as a woman, again, according to her, is different to the way you might dress in Europe. I don't know about the US, but in Europe. Whereas she was wearing a dress with like low cut like exposed shoulders. And apparently this kind of dress in Japan might be accentuating more features that Japanese people might find more, let's say, daring than other kind of clothes where, for example, in Japan, from what I heard, at least from her, like you might find it more likely to expose your legs rather than your upper part of the body. Whereas in Europe, from a personal experience, it seems to be more like the opposite. And this kind of stuff is a very minor thing, but might have a big cultural consequence on how people approach you in a day-to-day life. I mean, nightlife. So that's one thing that I found personally kind of interesting.
And by the way, I want to apologize. Someone mentioned when I said there's mostly guys here, I meant like speaking live right now, not necessarily in the audience. I will say I've never had experience on trains of sexual assault, though I talked to a number of my Japanese friends who are female. Almost every one of them has had one story of another, especially when they were younger, some type of assault to varying degrees on the train. And so, yeah, it's unfortunate. It's one of those things. It's crowded trains. You can't catch a person. There's no cameras to show it. It's just so that it's not even worth. It's almost like they can't even report it because there's nothing they can really to report because they have no anything to identify the perpetrator. Don't look at the pink or the female only train in your major train lines. That's not. Again, that's addressing a problem that is impossible to 100% address, unfortunately. So it's a necessary solution to a problem that still needs to be addressed. But yeah, be willing to use that if you do feel like the trains are too crowded. Use that front train if you're child or female.
Yeah, that's great. There's a female train. That's great. Okay, let's go to a more fun note. Is inversely from the the more negative aspects of Japanese culture. Is there anything from Japanese culture you guys would like to bring back to your home countries?
No tipping.
Second that. God.
Yeah, that one.
Better convenience stores.
Like no cars parked on the street. That's an interesting thing for me. But for the most part, in Tokyo at least, it's like you're not allowed to just park your car outside on the street. You have to go to a proper parking spot. And I think this changed a lot how I view the urban life or like moving around the city, because in a lot of in most European cities you have cars parked everywhere blocking the street, and the streets end up like seeming much smaller. Whereas in Tokyo you're not allowed to park your car on the side of the street. I thought that was like an interesting thing.
It would be nice if we could bring the cheap, delicious food back to our home countries. Is that possible?
What about the insurance? You're Americans after all.
Beautiful.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
There was actually one question I skipped over on insurance.
Yeah, so for insurance, actually, one thing that I wanted to say that I really love about Japan is that if you're employed, like if you're employed or if you're an employee of a company, you have to take mandatory health check exams every year, and I think that's a beautiful thing because it's not only curing any problem you might have, it's preventing, like checking every year if your blood is fine, your pressure, all kind of stuff. And I think that's amazing to me.
And one thing about the checkup is that the company pays for it. You don't have to pay for it at all.
Oh yeah.
Like the cool thing is, I guess specifically regarding medical insurance, is it's typical to get like 70% off of your bill, and then oftentimes, well, I'm not going to say oftentimes, but every company or school I've gone to has reimbursed the extra 30% to me whenever I bring receipts, except for my pre-existing conditions. That's not covered. But like if I get in a bike crash where I wreck my nose, for example, then they'll just pay off any remainder of the bills that I might have had from that remaining 30%. So like depending on your company, the insurance system and their treatment can just leave you with a very, very good. Okay, I'm not going to say Japanese doctors are the best. There are some really bad ones, but there are also some fantastic ones. So it's a mixed bag. But the system regarding health, in my experience, has been absolutely fantastic and easily the best up there with the NHS as far as I'm concerned. Really, really great.
There is one thing about the Japanese health system that I personally don't like, is that at least I'm American, so I can only compare the US to Japan, but there are no general practitioners in Japan. When you have an issue, you're supposed to decide what kind of doctor you need to go to and then go there yourself. So, like, if you have an ear issue, then you go to an ear, nose, and throat doctor. If you've got like a broken arm, or well, not a broken arm, but like you've got a cut or whatever, and you want to check that, then you need to go for like a they call it geka in Japanese, but like it's like for I don't even know what you call it. I guess wounds or whatever.
Yeah.
And then if you have like digestive issues or whatever, then you need to go to a specific digestive doctor. And it's really annoying trying to figure out whatever kind of issue you have and then trying to find the right kind of doctor for it.
Yeah, and like it's very different. Like it reminds me, it's a bit similar to how we have it in Italy, as in you just walk to the clinic, to the right clinic, and you just show up and wait like a certain amount of time, and then the doctor will see you. Whereas in other countries, you have to like make a reservation, or you have like your personal like GP, your general practitioner kind of doctor, like your family doctor, and then you have to like book an appointment and go there. Whereas in Japan, as Spock said, you just have to show up to whatever appropriate clinic you have to go to.
That's true to an extent, but if you've got a large general hospital near you, you can usually just show up at the desk and they'll tell you where to go, and you'll usually be able to get admitted the same day, in my experience. I think personally, like I very much prefer not having a GP because you can Google search very easily like what your issue is or what you think your issue might be, and then you'll usually get an answer very quickly as to where you need to go. And I think the general quality of care you get from these specialists is very high. Like my personal experience with the diabetes side of the system has been absolutely fantastic, even if their technology is a bit out of date regarding pumps. But I will say regarding the mental health question that just popped up, I think there's a very mixed bag there. Like my experience with, I guess, gender dysphoria and trans mental health counseling has been very, very good. But I know a lot of people get very, very poor experiences with therapists or whatever because mental health stuff is still lagging slightly behind elsewhere. Even if I think for the most part it's kind of an exaggerated divide. I think most of the issues really stem from work culture's responses to mental health rather than actual mental health care. But yeah.
Plus, it's much cheaper than in the States. I think like I've had a full like a yearly annual exam, and you're paying like $400 out of pocket. That's it. Whereas I'm sure in the States we're talking like thousands. Again, I haven't really had a health exam in the States, so I don't know. But yeah, for older guys like me, it's probably a good idea to always be willing to get into the healthcare system in Japan.
Oh yeah, the one thing that really bothers me actually is the weekend issue, right? Like on Sundays, you just can't get non-emergency medical treatment. So good fucking luck. Like after I got involved in a bike crash, I was worried Wynn might have gone septic, and I called an ambulance, and they were basically like, "No hospital can take you. Try again tomorrow, Monday morning." And I'm just like, "All right, okay, this is unbelievably stupid." I was like raging on Discord basically all night. Absolutely disgusting, honestly. But I think, yeah, like just hospital hours basically make no fucking sense. Like right now, if I need to go to my diabetes appointment, I need to get on a train to Kyoto and be there by 11 a.m., which is fine. But the fact the clinic closes at 11 a.m. and then is out of operation the entire rest of the day feels absolutely absurd. I'm not sure what it's like in other countries, but it's very common, at least in my experience in the UK, for places to be open 24/7 with a rotating staff. But that doesn't seem to be for non-emergency and non-inpatient people admitted to the hospital, like taking beds. It's very hard to get like basic treatments and stuff. Also, the pharmacy system is very, very cool. And they're very helpful, like to getting you to switch to generics, etc., to help save you money and all that. Like I think the medical system in general is just very, very good and very supportive of people, and very proactive too. Like every time there's like with the health exams, like every time there's an issue, a doctor's very quick to refer me to someone else. So yeah.
Cool. I'm gonna go on to a slightly different question. There's a lot of kind of cultural things in Japanese, like, for example, before you start a meal, sometimes people will say certain things, or after you finish a meal, you say certain things. you guys think it's important when you're living in Japan to follow these kind of unique Japanese traditions that you see a lot of Japanese people doing?
Hey, when in Rome.
I mean, I don't think it's necessary. At least, I mean, specifically for meal stuff. I don't think anybody ever says "itadakimasu" when you're like eating at a restaurant. Like,
Are you kidding? What? Yeah, they do.
or at least not to the waiter or whatever. But for example, like before you go out, saying like "gochiso-sama" might be normal, and that's no problem in doing that. But if you don't, I don't think people will care. At least from my point of view.
Well, I mean, no one's gonna care if you don't do it, but I mean, you're gonna see people do it. Like right before the meal, you're gonna split their chopsticks and say "itadakimasu" as a group, or right before they go to eat. You know, they might do it in different ways for fun, but yeah, you're gonna hear that. You're gonna hear "gochiso-sama," but you're gonna say it as a group leaving the restaurant. But if one guy's gonna pay it, you say it to him, to the guy who paid it, then he can say it to the owner of the restaurant.
Yeah, but like I've never seen anybody like go to like a ramen place like eating alone and saying like "itadakimasu." Maybe it's in a group, maybe, but like alone, I've never seen that.
Yeah, they'll say it quietly. I mean, yeah, I've seen that too. You know, just right before you eat. It's no big deal. It's not necessary. It just depends on the person. You're right. I'm sorry. We're arguing about small stuff.
It's not Naruto, I think, is the point. We're not looking at the Naruto sort of like clap your hands together and just do a deep breath before you dig into your ramen sort of deal. Like,
I've never seen Naruto, so I don't know what I'm assuming. Yeah, if it's anime, don't judge Japanese culture off anime. Let's just all agree to that little thing. Right?
Yeah.
But I will say there was a funny video series called The Japanese Tradition, and it was meant as a joke. But watch that with a person from Japan, and they're gonna laugh and they're gonna explain some of the more of the soul stuff you might miss. But that's also a fun video series to watch because it's grounded in truth. It's an old series you can find on YouTube now. But yeah, The Japanese Tradition.
Yeah. On food, do you guys? A lot of people say Japanese people are very like underweight, or like there's no overweight people. Do you think that's because of the typical food cuisine, or why are there so overweight people in Japan?
I think there are two reasons. One, portion sizes are fucking tiny, and as someone that has a like inhumanly fast metabolism, like I have to eat like 3 times as much as the average person. Like eating here is really expensive. Eating out here, rather, is really expensive. Not at Osho. If you eat at Osaka no Osho, you can eat like 10 people's worth of food for like $5. It's amazing. But I do recommend those places. Gyoza's good. And the other reason I think is like, so I think there's a YouTube channel called What I've Learned that he's a guy that lives in Japan and makes videos, and I think he put it very succinctly when he said Japan eats a lot more food and a lot less food-like products, like the amount of processed food, the amount of like pickled stuff, tsukimono and whatever, is really high compared to like say the American or British diet, and I think that definitely reflects in that like you get a lot more, not necessarily like healthy foods, but the balance of the diet seems a lot better. There's a lot more white rice versus bread, for example, and stuff like that. It certainly reflects, and there are certainly obese people in Japan, but I think the rate of obesity it definitely reflects in the diet for sure.
Yeah, and I think going back to the point of like the annual health exam, they will drill into you that you're overweight. They will tell you you have to do more exercise, you have to eat less, you have to be careful. And I think reminding people every year that they are overweight or obese is a good thing. As in, I mean, not shaming them, but at least telling them, hey, your health is like you might have health issues for this, right? And but yeah, I think the number one is definitely portion size, as Sky said.
You know, as a guy that's 120 kilograms, I feel personally attacked by that statement. No, I think what he said is right. There's the portion sizes, but also you don't see as much. I think sugary sodas. You just don't have that much. Snacks. It's not as common to go and get the chips from the convenience like we you can probably see in the States. And McDonald's and Burger King are not like big staples. There is Moss Burger as well, but most of them are not. Again, they're not like as prolific as the daily food source as it would be in the States.
Yeah, and there's certainly be change over time in the sense that traditional Japanese food, generally speaking, is like healthier and lower calorie and such. And there has been certainly more influence from Western foods in terms of, more burgers and like fatty or whatever that sort of food sort of making it into the country and becoming more popular. And I think you do see the obesity rates going up a little bit in Japan now. I think that's one of the factors in that.
One other thing outside of food was the physical fitness. So again, they do have sports days, and generally physical fitness is stressed in Japan more so than you'd see in like US. Probably less equal. I would think Europe is. What is Europe like as far as stressing physical fitness?
Depends. I don't know specifically, but like Europe also is very different depending on whether you're like English speaking side of Europe, like Ireland, or well, UK. It's not really Europe, but yeah, or like Southern Europe, or I think it's very different. It's hard to say.
One thing is that I'd like to know about the difference in food, at least in Japan, is less fizzy, sweet drinks and stuff. Does wonders for dental health. I had a bunch of cavities when I lived in the US. I moved to Japan, and I was terrified of dentists in Japan because I've heard some horror stories. I didn't go to a dentist for 4 years. When I finally went to one, I had no cavities at all over 4 years without going to a dentist. And I attribute that to a significant decrease in the amount of cola that I drank, basically.
And all the tea that has no sweetener in it. That's great.
On the subject of tea, I don't think any of you are Kansai people, but Nakao, the Oyakodon chain, their tea is that I recommend to literally everyone in chat. If you ever come to Japan and you're in the Kansai region, make sure you stop off at least once and have like maybe 2 or 3 pitchers of their tea, because it's actually just the best thing. Like it's genmaicha. I don't know what they do to it. It's like crack. It's amazing. Can't recommend it enough. That is all.
Yeah, I have a question. What do you guys think? Is Japan friendly for vegetarians? How can a vegetarian in Japan, make sure they're not eating like meat because the cheese has like a film of fish on it or something?
That's hard.
It's basically almost impossible. It's really, really hard in Japan as a vegetarian.
It's also
especially if you can't do seafood. Go ahead, Mark.
There's also like a weird notion of what vegetarian is for some people, like for some Japanese people. Like you might say, "Hey, is this vegetarian?" and they will say yes, but it will have like fish, or like the broth of the ramen or whatever will have meat. Like, oh, it's vegetarian because there's no meat in it, even though it's made from meat. So it's it can be a very hit or miss kind of thing. At least according to what I heard. I'm not vegetarian, so I wouldn't know directly.
Yeah, I had a family or friends come over from the States, and they were vegetarian, and their father just tried to help them out, like ordered some sushi but was this one only like rice and cucumber. That was the only thing he ordered for them, nothing else, because that was the only thing on the menu that just had nothing to eat.
I would say I'm not vegetarian, but Japanese people are pretty supportive. I mean, not a lot of Japanese people are vegetarian, but if you tell them that you're vegetarian, they'll be like, "Oh, that's nice." They'll be supportive, but they won't really understand why you're vegetarian, and you might need to talk to them a little bit about it before they understand that no, you absolutely do not eat meat.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in really quickly to talk about this because I have some dietary restrictions, and I know a lot of people who do. And I want to just double down and say, yes, that is definitely the case. Japanese people are very accommodating, and if you go to restaurants, if you go out to eat, you can always ask. You might not want to say like vegetarian specifically. You might just want to say what your restrictions are, and if you do that, they will really bend over backwards to try and see if they know the answers to your questions. And a lot of the time, they might not know the answer, but that's a lot better than having something that you can't eat anyways. So I feel like you shouldn't be too afraid if you're a vegetarian and you want to go to Japan, as long as you know how to ask. Yeah.
To follow up on that, I'd say like Japan in general is like people make out like Japanese people hate when you ask for modifications on a meal, but like if you just ask for things to be taken out or removed, no one ever really has issues. Like if you explain like, oh, I have this or that, or something stops me from eating it, or a lot of places won't even inquire, they'll just assume. It's when you start like pushing for additions that people start getting a little tetchy, which is very understandable. But yeah, very accommodating in my experience.
Okay. Then if one more question about food, is it easy to specifically only avoid seafood? What if you're like, okay, with meat, but specifically seafood you want to avoid? Is that possible?
It depends on what you mean. If it's an allergy, then it's very, very hard. Like because you need to be so careful with the broths and there's just like if you're allergic to like, for example, seaweed related stuff, that's like also makes it even more impossible. On the other hand, if it's just like you're generally trying to avoid it and you won't have an allergic reaction, in that case, it's not that bad. There's plenty of meat-based, heavy carb based dishes in Japan, so I wouldn't say it's that bad.
Okay. Then maybe we will step off the topic of food. And religion is kind of an interesting issue in Japan. Do you think you would need to kind of study the religion or kind of follow religious practices in Japan while you were there?
No,
What?
not at all.
No, not at all.
Yeah, not required. And to add some background on that, like Japanese people themselves, a lot of people don't consider themselves heavily religious in that sense. A lot of people consider themselves not religious. That said, everyone, it's almost like a cultural background of like the Shinto and sometimes Buddhist related things in like just how people think about the world. And those people, like most people, even though they're not religious, sometimes believe, for example, that spirits or like objects have like souls and stuff like that, and that sort of like drives how they act in the world. But a lot of people do not consider themselves to be religious, and as a result, it's not really expected for you to be the same. So
Yeah, I agree, and also especially, I think it's interesting if you're interested in that to like be aware of the cultural background of all kind of stuff because if you live in Japan or even like if you're visiting for a long time, you will encounter all kind of like holidays or cultural festivals or all kind of things that if you know like the like how to approach them or why they are like why people do certain things, you will definitely appreciate them much more, and you might be able to join in for whatever like New Year tradition or like summer festival or all kind of stuff. You will have a much better time if you're able to properly appreciate the culture. But it's not a requirement. Like people will not care if you're like whatever religion you follow.
Japanese people are spiritual, but not really religious on the whole. It depends on the person, of course.
Okay, so I would say this is Japan is kind of religious, but they're not forcing it upon people. But you're going to see it see a large group of people in black outfits. You know that they're probably coming from a funeral, and if they are drunk, that means hey, they've already done their ceremonies. Are very big in Japan. All sorts of various ceremonies, like you mentioned, New Year's ceremony. There's probably ceremonies visiting the shrines too, and it's very brief. It's just give a little money, do the hand clap and the bow. The most serious ceremonies are going to be that you're going to probably experience is going to be with the funerals, and they're going to take that seriously, because it's obviously going to be a very emotional time at that point. So that's been the only time if you are involved with funerals when you need to take the religious aspects of it seriously out of respect.
Okay, then maybe our last topic for today's stage event will be just about some fun things in Japan, tourism, and kind of going around and having fun in Japan. First opening question would be, what is your favorite season to visit Japan?
Any season,
Yeah.
because each one's going to be different.
So I think the best time for me, personally speaking, is between September and October maybe. And if you delay it a bit more until like November, you can get like all the nice autumn leaves on the trees. Because for me specifically, because during spring I get like allergies, and I like if you get a lot of allergies, you might not have a great time like seeing like cherry blossoms and all this stuff. Just as a selfish kind of point of view. But I visited as a tourist during September, October, and also I had friends visit during those those months, and I think it's the best time to get like a not too hot and not too cold weather, and you get to see like you can freely move around and have fun, I think.
One thing I'd like to note is do not visit Japan over New Year's, because that's basically like the Japanese equivalent of Christmas in the US, where everything shuts down for like 3 or 4 days in a row and you won't be able to do anything.
Yeah, and likewise for Golden Week, I guess.
Oh, and Silver Week. You might as well throw that in there as well in the summertime. Although you are saying avoid the summertime. But then again, like I said, the other reason you don't want to visit those times is because not just everything's shut down, but also everyone's on travel. So everything, all the prices are skyrocketed, are raised up high. Travel is just crowded everywhere: trains, planes, automobiles, and yeah. So those are the reason why avoid those dates.
I just wanted to chip in and just say I like winter. I think winter's really fucking cool in Japan, especially night times. Like wandering through Kyoto or wandering through Osaka at night in winter is genuinely like strangely beautiful, given it's a city, right? Like you're wandering for a city, but it's got a really just wonderful atmosphere, especially when it's snowing. If you can find one of the less urban cities, I guess, urban cities, I guess, not urban hell cities like Kyoto or Kobe, right, with a little more variety in them, and visit those at winter. I can't recommend that enough. It's gorgeous. Like,
I live in Yokohama. That's near Kamakura, so that's considered like little Kyoto. Little Kyoto. So yeah, Kamakura would be a very beautiful place to visit, and also go to maybe Enoshima Island, which is a nice island to visit as well. Actually now is a good time to visit because again the tourism is down. But yeah.
Well, it's down for a good reason, but no, I'm just kidding. That's the next question actually is, what are some fun places to visit in Japan?
Everywhere. Like I feel like the country is beautiful, like no matter where you go, depending on your interest. For me personally, I'm not a big fan of like large touristic places, and the best places I've been to, I think the most fun place I've been to was around Oita, which is like totally random place in the like in nowhere, like in Kyushu, and we rented a car with my friends. We went from Tokyo all the way to Nagasaki and back, which is like a really big trip by car, and we stopped in all these kind of like random small villages and places, and we ate sushi on the coastline, and it was amazing. And I think for me personally, my favorite places were all these small villages where there's like, I don't know, maybe like 300 400 people or something crazy like that, and they've never seen a foreigner before, and I think that was like an amazing experience.
I'll say I'm not a good traveler. I'm not one of those guys that likes to travel, but when I travel, I enjoy it because I let my wife make the choices on that part. But I will say for those that are thinking about it, there's a couple mistakes I've seen. First off, check out a TV show called You wa Nanishi ni Nippon e? Why Did You Come to Japan? Idea behind the TV shows are they interview people who are just flying into Japan at Narita or Haneda, and they ask why they come to Japan, and they're usually visitors on vacation for some reason to do something. The one mistake I've seen that pissed me off is that they come to Japan to see one place, but they never bothered to check if that place was going to be open on the day they visit. So do your research before you come to Japan to visit. And the other thing is just check out that show anyway, because you might get some good ideas of what the experience of Japan that just is outside of Tokyo.
I'm going to give a non-answer here, but if you are planning on doing visits to a lot of different places, I would recommend, if you're able to, looking into a JR pass. Very, very helpful, relatively cheap, especially if you're going to do a lot of travel to lots of different places. I would recommend you definitely look into that as an option.
There's also Sweet Passmo as to allow you to use the trains. You just put the money on ahead of time, so you just tap. You don't have to worry about tickets or anything after that. But you still got to put money on the cards.
The JR Rail Pass, to explain that to people who don't know what it is basically there are several different rail companies in Japan. One of the biggest ones, it used to be a public rail company owned by the government. I think that might have changed. I don't know the details. But anyway, the JR Rail Pass lets you use all the JR trains throughout the entire country for as much as you want for a couple $100 for 1, 2, or 3 weeks. And that includes, this is the important part, it includes the Shinkansen, the bullet train that goes across the country. And like a single one-way ride on the Shinkansen can cost up to like $100 or about 10,000 yen. So if you end up riding the Shinkansen like 3 times in a week, then you'll end up making back your money. And it basically just lets you go all over the country as much as you want, wherever you want, for really cheap. It's an amazing deal.
It really is, yeah. For reference, you can just go to the train station like 30 minutes before and get a ticket to somewhere. If you suddenly decide you don't want to go there anymore, you want to go somewhere else, you just go up to the counter and show your JR pass. They will change it for you. Super convenient if you want to travel to a lot of different places. It's really a good way to save on money and be able to visit a bunch of different places in Japan at the same time.
If I may, I have I want to recommend Kansai as a general area, not like any specific place. I just think that like outside of Tokyo, it's the place where you're going to get the most variety and cool places to see. Like I think if you like I did to introduce my friend to Japanese culture, a quick run across Kobe, Kyoto, and Osaka essentially, and I feel like just those three cities alone show you so many different facets of what Japan has to offer. I think if you want to do a visit, then it's absolutely worth it to just come through that area. It's also just like it's a very different feel to Tokyo while still being very familiar, I suppose. You're not gonna like head up to like Aomori-ken or whatever to get a different vibe, I guess. I don't know.
Nice. Okay, maybe last question for the panel. We are 6 minutes over time, but one last question is if someone has the eventual goal of living in Japan, what's something they can do on their first trip there to decide whether or not living in Japan is right for them? What's something they should try doing?
Working.
So for me, I think first of all, like visiting the country before you decide to move is a really good thing to do. However, you need to be aware that living here as a tourist is a totally different thing than living here working, because most of your time is going to be spent working, and like you're going to have like a few weekends and whatever to visit, and so it's really hard to live the tourist lifestyle as a working person. However, for me, I came here to Tokyo and I stayed here in Tokyo for 1 month as a tourist, just visiting all kind of neighborhoods and all kinds of stuff and see how people go about their life. I also visited the office for where I was going to work, just to get an idea on how my future coworkers worked. Of course, if you don't have a job yet, that's not something you can do, but it was useful for me. And I think the thing that helped me a lot was not do specifically touristic things. I just like walk around the neighborhoods, get a feel for how people like move around, like what there is to do in the different neighborhoods of Tokyo, and not specifically the touristic ones. And also look at things like which train lines, like which train lines are the most or the least crowded, and look at the like rush hour, like 8-9 a.m. See how many people are in the train station, so you get to see like the actual hellish lifestyle of the working class, I would say.
Yeah, that was one thing I was going to mention was go to a busy train station at like 7 or 8 in the morning and try riding the train and experience the hell that will be the rest of your life.
And another thing is, if you can't play loud music. You got to be respectful of the neighbors. Again, this is, you got to be conscious of your surroundings and just don't be aware about standing out where it's just not something you're going to do, because you're going to be living there as opposed to just visiting, where any problems you cause is going to be, you're not going to have to put up with them. Whereas when you live there, if you cause problems, you have to then live with the repercussions of the problems you started.
Yeah, and I think I agree with Morg a lot. You should think about like what are you actually going to be doing when you're living there, and how can you get a taste of it. And along those lines, I mean, I think you should try to meet people, because that's who you're going to be like hanging out with when you're there. So I would recommend, if it's something you can do, like go to bars and like actually try to meet people, even if you don't necessarily speak Japanese yet. A lot of places are like open to foreigners, and people want to meet foreigners and such. So there's always the opportunity to actually like meet people and try to build relationships. And I think that can give you a good taste of the social aspect of things.
I guess my input here would be, if you want to like really get yourself a good experience, like go online and look at like job application forms, like print off maybe 200 or 300 of them, and then like fill in the exact same information on all 200 of them over the space of about a week. And that'll get you a sense for the amount of paperwork you're going to have to do when you're here. And that's maybe a little less, given the amount of trips you'll be making to the ward office, how many things you'll have to be filling out all the time, and get used to writing your name in katakana. Those are really good things to get you off straight away. I guess, I don't know, like I think one thing that everyone universally complains about is how papery Japan is still regarding everything. So if you're not a fan of spending hours waiting in queues to do pointless shit that you find absolutely tedious and redundant, then you're not going to like it here, probably. Yeah.
Guy speaks the truth.
Okay. Then any last little tiny comments about anything?
I think Japan is great. That's one point. Like, just gonna leave it out. Yeah.
Same.
Yeah.
I go there like twice a year.
Yeah, just don't base it off any anime or dramas that you've seen. Definitely.
Yeah.
But again, it's a country like any other. So if you bring your baggage with it, but also you can kind of change a little bit because it will change you a little bit. But yeah, you'll still be the same person, just in a different place. So just remember about that. Don't expect the country to make you happy.
Yeah. Okay. Then thank you everyone for coming. We have 132 people listening right now, which is amazing. And that is our second stage event for this month. We'll be having one more at next month sometime. Okay, the current topic is on how bilingual Japanese natives grow up outside of Japan. Okay, since it is so far away, it's subject to change, but that's the current plan for the next event. Specifically, it is on July, where
24th.
is it? Sorry?
24th.
24th, thank you. July 24th. And so that is July 24th. That's like almost in a month, over a month. That'll be the next one. Thank you all for coming to this one. We might have more stage events between that or after that. If you are around and you would like to join the server, we would welcome you with open arms. We have plenty of resources for those who are starting Japanese or interested in Japanese culture. You can definitely stick around and hang out with us. Okay, we have voice chats going all day and people in all the channels of different kinds ready to talk to you. So if anyone wants to hang around, you are welcome to. I'd like everyone to silently give a round of applause behind your computer for our speakers. They've been great for us. They are very experts in Japan, and we were glad to have them. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
And that'll be the end of the talk.
Awesome. Thank you so much for hosting, Ryan.
Thanks for hosting.
Yeah. Thanks.